So this is the Power of Discovery STEM Squared webinar that's really going to talk with you about getting set up for success. This is not a content piece. We're not going to talk about STEM content. What we're going to do is really talk about how you can help get your program set up so that your staff can be successful in doing this, because a lot of times the devil is in the details, which we all know, and so that can be a challenge. So we're going to take a look at that. Throughout the year, we're going to be broadcasting both kinds of webinars, content-based webinars, and then also practical tips for being successful in that setup. So I would like to thank you all for attending, and we'll get started. So this initiative, the Power of Discovery STEM Squared, is sponsored by the California Department of Education, which we call CDE, California After School Network, which is CAN, C-A-N, California Science Learning Network, CSLNet, and the Bechtel, Noyce, and Samueli Foundations. This webinar is being brought to you as part of the work of OC STEM, and OC STEM has become a RISP, a Regional Innovation Support Provider for the area of STEM, and we are working in partnership with the Discovery Science Center, the Tiger Woods Learning Center, and Think Together. But we're here to support everyone in Southern California, be that Orange County, Los Angeles County, San Bernardino, or Riverside counties, to really move this forward, this whole initiative of STEM education forward. So the purpose of today's webinar is to really share some strategies to support effective STEM practices in your program. And the things we're going to cover are setting STEM learning goals and clear expectations, preparation, what you need to do in advance, things and tips for people to think about so that the lessons themselves go well, how you manage the environment, especially when everyone is active and collaborative and moving from place to place, and so sometimes that can be challenging. And then we're going to talk about the importance of debriefing the STEM, not just the activity. That seems to be a real challenge for folks. They talk about how did the activity go, did you like it, but not really the science learning, and that's going to be a key part of what we do moving forward. So those are the objectives that we're going to cover, the content that we're going to cover during this webinar. Again, if you have any sort of a question or you would like to be mic'd so that you can speak, you need to raise your hand, and I will do that. When we hit a little pause where you can do that, or you could also type in a question, and if you do that, then I'll be able to read those and then be able to expand on that and answer your questions. So that being said, we're going to get started moving forward. So the first place I want to touch bases is this. LiAS stands for Learning in After School and Summer, and this is one of the most effective litmus tests of what's going on in your program that I can imagine. This is certainly the point of view that's being supported by the California Department of Ed and also by the California After School Network. This is about all learning, no matter where it is, but certainly it applies to after school, and it certainly applies to STEM learning. The way I would use these 5 words would be a quick checklist that I would help my staff learn to go through mentally when they are thinking about a STEM learning opportunity, but also when you're observing one. So the focus of the LiAS principles is what is happening with the learner. What is happening with the youth, the child? What's going on for them? So the question is this learning active? Now, not all learning is active, because sometimes we kind of sit and listen to information, but somewhere in a STEM lesson, young people need to be involved, and so the learning needs to become active. So it doesn't mean every single second of the lesson but they do need to be engaged and involved. It also needs to be collaborative. That means that young people are working with other young people. This can be done in pairs, small groups, or teams. The advantage of pair work is that you're pretty sure if two people are working together, at least 50% of the time, the young person is actively engaged, because seldom do kids let other kids slide. Now, if you have 4 young people in a small group, that means you're pretty sure 25% of the time they're engaged. So the reason we like collaborative work is twofold. One, because we're sure that young people are engaged when we do this, and also one person's ideas spark another person's ideas, and so consequently what happens is that they build upon one another, and they're able to move forward probably much more quickly and much more deeply because they've worked collaboratively. And even if you're working with your young people in pairs, it's perfectly okay from time to time, and actually it would be encouraged that you put 2 pairs together and have them collaborate in a larger venue. The third part of the principle is that the learning is meaningful and relevant. We've all heard kids say before, I don't know why I'm doing this. It doesn't make any difference. I don't get it. So we want to be sure that young people understand how this learning opportunity that they're partaking in applies to their life, so that it's relevant and meaningful to them. So that's really important. The fourth part is that it supports mastery. Are they learning some science that they didn't know before? Are they learning any sort of skills that they will be able to apply? And so that's a move forward. That's also very important. And the last one is that the activity they're engaged in broadens their horizons. The ultimate goal, I think, for a lot of our STEM programs in after school would be that young people who are typically underrepresented in the STEM fields once they become adults and are working can say at the end of the day, I want to be a scientist. I think I could do that work. And so it broadens their horizons so that they can think about themselves differently. So if you have those 5 items in your head when you go in to observe a program, and you just quickly go through and ask yourself, what evidence is here that this program is active, collaborative, meaningful, supports mastery, and broadens horizons, you will be able to do a quick check on whether or not the STEM lesson is really meeting your objectives. And in a management sense, when all of these things are occurring in a lesson, what you find is that you have far fewer interruptions from young people because they are so focused and on task. So it works to support setting yourself up for success if your activities include those 5 things. Okay, moving forward, it's also really important that you set clear expectations. I think one of the challenges for adults in working with young people is that we just think they ought to know how to do certain things. Well, they know what we expect. They just should do it because we expect it. But if we don't go back every time and set those clear expectations and make sure that everybody's in agreement about those expectations, what we have sometimes is a battle of wills, and what we find is that young people are not nearly as cooperative as we think they ought to be, and when they're not cooperating, that means that they're pulling against you and pulling against the lesson, which makes it much more challenging. So you should set clear expectations around collaboration, and if you're going to work, whether that's in partners or small groups, your expectation is that everybody is participating in that activity, that you don't have one young person doing all of the work while the other one sits back and relaxes. So you want to talk about that, but you also want to talk about the fact that collaboration doesn't mean that you're going to argue over every single point, that I want to do it this way and I can't give in. So they're really trying to work as a team to accomplish the goal. And I think that we need to set that really up really clearly with kids. And I think one good way to do that is to say, what's collaboration? What does that mean? And how will it look? If you and one other person or you and your team are really collaborating, what's it going to look like? What's it going to sound like? And how will that feel to you as a group? So that kids are very clear about what that looks like. I think that it's also important that they understand about active learning. A lot of times kids do an activity and at the end they don't have much to say about it. And so it's not just an activity for the sake of an activity. They are having a learning opportunity that is hands-on. The expectation is that every participant is going to learn something. Now, I like to say that learning comes in one of three categories. The first one is a confirmation. If they've already done an experiment before, if they've already learned some content, then the learning for them that day will be a confirmation so that they can say to themselves, I knew that and it still applies. The second kind of learning that happens is one that adjusts. There's a minor adjustment to what you thought. You thought it only worked when the ball was rolling downhill, but you now realize that that same principle applies when it's going flat. I'm not saying that's an accurate statement, but in other words, you understand something more about the concept. And then the third kind of learning is what I call those aha moments, where you go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that it was going to work out that way. I didn't expect that. So when we explain and share with young people that learning is happening all the time, whether or not it confirms something you already knew, adjusts or adds to something you knew, or is a total new learning, you are still responsible for learning something and being able to share out at the end what that learning was. Another clear expectation that I think is important to share with young people is that you expect that the activity is relevant and meaningful. And should they not see the connection, they need to speak up. It's hard to stay engaged in an activity that doesn't seem relevant to you. So if they feel like they don't understand, or they believe they just don't understand what's the point of this, then they need to raise the question, and then there can be conversation about how it might apply. So for instance, if you were looking at Newton's first law of motion, and they're looking at the topic of inertia, and they don't understand how inertia applies to them in any way, shape, or form, they don't see its relevance, then it would be important to have that conversation so that they can see what that means and how it might be relevant, whether that's them skating down the sidewalk on their skateboard and hitting an upraised part of the cement, which becomes one of those unbalanced forces, and what will happen to them is that they will end up perhaps skidding away on their skateboard. So it's really important that they raise the question if they don't understand. And then it would be important to express to kids and help them understand that you're going to be asking a lot of questions. And even if they're not sure of a right answer, it's not about right answers. It's about thinking. It's about looking at the information you have. It's about creating your own questions and listening to other people's questions to determine whether or not you can provide some portion of the answer, or you can figure out where to go and find the answer. So that expectation, I think, is helpful, because a lot of times young people don't understand that they need to be an active participant in the learning. They do what I call the baby bird syndrome, which is sit there and wait for you to pour it in, and then they'll tell it back to you when it's appropriate in their mind. But it's really about helping young people to ask questions so that they can build their own skill set and to talk about and identify what they they don't understand clearly. And then, of course, I think there has to be a clear expectation around whatever your agreements are on cleaning up. One of the things I think is important is that young people understand that they're part of the responsibility that they have is to leave the space as good or better than when they found it. And it's not the job of the leader to go around and point to every single piece of paper or to every single item for that to be put away. They would follow the agreement that together they will work to be sure that the space is as clean or cleaner than when they arrived, and then the young people can determine what that's going to take to make happen. When you don't talk about cleanup before you need to clean up, then what you find is a lot of resistance by kids, and they love to say, it's not mine, I didn't do that, I don't know why I have to clean it up. Whereas if you establish that from the beginning, you are preventative and you are really going to set yourself up for success. So the reason that these clear expectations are important, and you can certainly have others that you would add to that, it's important so young people know what you want them to do. You'll notice that all of those were expressed in the positive. It tells young people what you want. It's really important that your staff that's leading the kids talks in terms of what they want rather than in terms of what they don't want. When you tell someone don't do this, two things happen. One, it becomes the only thing they want to do because that's what's in their mind, and it's very difficult for your brain to challenge or to make that transference between a positive and a negative. That's why when you say to someone, don't hit the ball in the net, they'll hit it in the net because their brain hears that as hit the ball in the net, oh wait, I'm not supposed to do that, and by then it's too late. So that's part of what happens. So you start to immediately think about what you told me not to do, and so consequently I'm not able to process that very well. And the second thing that happens is even if they process it, there's a void. It's like, well, if I can't do that, what should I do? And not all the times are they able to come up with that. So when we talk to kids in the positive and we set clear expectations about what we want to occur, and we give them a meaningful action to do, it is much easier to help them manage their own behavior, and it's much easier for us to be successful. So that's why we think that that is really important. I don't know if I went through 2 slides or not, but I'm going to check. So I'm going to back up. I want to talk about setting clear STEM goals. It's really important that you understand what STEM concept do you want the young people to gain an understanding of. That way, at the end of the lesson, your program leader will be able to better debrief what they've learned. So for example, if the goal was that the youth will understand and explain Newton's first law of motion, and if you're not familiar with Newton's first law of motion, sometimes it's called the law of inertia, but what that law says is that an object in motion will tend to stay in motion at the same speed in the same direction unless it's acted upon by an unbalanced force. So if you're skating down the sidewalk, unless you hit a raised crack in the sidewalk, you'll tend to keep going unless it's disrupted. Now, obviously, also when you're skating down the sidewalk, there is friction happening between the wheels and the sidewalk, which is also going to slow you down. But it's really understanding that things will keep going. I think you've probably all seen those little rectangles that have a fishing line, and at the end of the fishing line, you'll see a steely, like a steely marble, and if you pull one out, you can see the one on the other side coming through. It just will stay in that motion. The second part of the Newton's first law is that an object at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an unbalanced force, which means that nothing's going to move. So it's really a conversation about inertia. So in this goal example, if you want young people to understand Newton's first law of motion, you might have to do several lessons to cover the whole law. So the objective of today's lesson might be that youth will explain inertia, or they could explain motion, or they could explain friction, or they could explain propulsion. Or they could explain force, whatever you think would most help them to understand your goal, which is that they would understand the whole law. And then you're going to talk about strategies that you might use to move that forward when you're setting your goals. So are you going to use a content video? Are you going to go onto YouTube and find something? Are you going to have the kids use the skills of observation? Are you going to just have them do a series of hands-on experiences? Are you going to set up debriefing protocols? All of the above. What strategies will you use? If you set that up at the beginning, and then along with that you set clear expectations with the kids, you will find that you are best set up for successful implementation of STEM. So do set clear STEM goals, and then also set very clear expectations, which we already talked about. So if anybody has any thoughts or questions, you could raise your hand now if you would like to chime in, or you can type it into the question box. If not, we'll move forward. Give you just a few seconds in case you want to do that. Okay, so we're going to move on. So the next thing, after you've established your STEM goals, you know exactly what you want the kids to walk away with. You've set clear expectations with them about what their part is going to be in the STEM learning, during the STEM learning activities. Then what you're going to want to do is to really prepare. Back that up. Don't know why it went forward. So one of the things that I think is important for staff to have is probably some background information that they can read through, because if you're not well grounded in all of those STEM informational pieces, it's very challenging to work with kids. So if you have not yourself ever gone through and paid attention to the Newton's first law of motion, it would be important for you to read the background information on that. One of the things I love to do is to go into Google and type in, for instance, if I were doing first law of motion, I would type in Newton's first law of motion kids. And that way I'm going to get information that is kid-friendly, which probably means I'm going to be able to understand it. And sometimes it will also show you just a little tiny video or a scenario of some sort to really drive that home. So it's important that in preparation, your staff who's delivering it, the content to the kids, has enough background information to be able to move the project forward and understand what you're really trying to drive for. The second thing that I think needs to happen in preparation to be sure that your lesson goes smoothly is this. If there's going to be an experiment that you're going to have kids do, whether that's in pairs or small groups, it's really important that the staff member does it before they do it with kids. Things that when you read them sound so simple and it seems so easy, when you start to implement with just yourself, you run into snags. And if you're trying to deal with 8 to 10 small groups of young people and you don't really know what's going to happen, that can be very challenging. So a lot of times I think what happens is that we plan lessons in what I call emergency mode. It's like, oh my gosh, I need a lesson. Let's do this activity. And it hasn't really been thought through. So there's nothing more helpful in preparing than doing the activity that you want the young people to be engaged in before them. And that way you can figure out how to engage them in demonstrating the activity, what questions came up for you, what logistics were important for you to understand so that you can set that up in a better way. It's also important that that your staff really read through the lesson thoroughly. A lot of times I think people read like I do, which is to just quickly peruse something and think I understand, and then when I go back and really read through it, I miss some key points. It was very interesting to me. We received an email about a phone call this week, and only one person out of all the people who read the email realized that the date for the phone call was incorrect. And so that's because we were all quickly reading through and not paying attention to the details. So having your program leader really read through the lesson thoroughly is important. And then it's also important for them to make a list of all the materials and supplies that they're going to need. So if the direction says use an eyedropper and drop 1 drop of water on the penny to see at a time until you can discover where the surface tension is broken and the water falls off the penny, then if you don't have an eyedropper, that's not going to be as successful. So really to read through the list of materials and the supplies that they will need. And then if they actually do the experiment with that list of supplies and materials, then they will know if they've managed to capture the entire list. I like to think of the difference between a material and a supply as this. A material is something that we can use over and over and over. If you're going to do a lot of STEM activities, there are certain materials that you just need to have on hand, maybe measuring cups. Maybe it's plastic cups, maybe it's paper towels. What are those things that you're going to need to have on hand? While paper towels are really more of a supply because they're consumable, what materials do you need that you can use over and over in a variety of ways? And then what supplies will you need, which would be like the paper towels, which you're going to use up over time, but you won't probably use them all up at one time. So it's important to make those lists and to be sure that you have them all. I can't tell you how many times I've been to a site and what the program leader discovers as they're trying to implement this with kids is that one key supply or material is missing, or that they miscounted. They really are going to need 8 straws to put on different sorts of filaments so they can determine what the friction rate is, and you don't have enough straws to go around. So it's really important that people make a list of the supplies and materials that they'll need, be sure they have them all, and then go through the experiment or the activity first so you can be sure that you have what you need. It's also important that you package materials for easy distribution. If you have materials spread out on a table and you want kids to come up and get them each one group at a time, come up and pick up one of each of those materials, you certainly can do that. That's going to take you a little longer for distribution, but sometimes it's the only way to distribute the supplies because you're looking at liquid or other things. But if it's possible to use either a paper or plastic baggie to put the materials that each group will need. If you do that in a prepackaged way, then you will not be having your program leader worried about distributing supplies. They will be able to be focused on the lesson. So that does matter. There is at Smart and Final the world's largest baggie. I don't know if that's really true, but it's a 2-gallon baggie, and I love those because you can get a variety of materials in that baggie. The baggie can be saved over and over and over, and it's big enough that you don't have to bend and fold everything you put in it. So you might want to consider that as an easy distribution method. And then again, think about the cleanup at the beginning. Not only do you have agreements about that, but you need to ask yourself, how are you going to clean this up at the end? So for instance, if you don't have a water supply in the room that you're going to be using, are you going to get a bucket so that kids can wash their hands at the end or at the beginning? Or are you going to all go out to the restroom? Or are you giving them hand wipes? Or are you distributing, the cleaner, the sanitizers? What are you going to do? What are you going to do to wipe up tables? What should they do, for instance, if they've been doing bubble experiments, which are pretty wet? How is that going to clean up? What do you need? Do you need sponges? Do you need extra paper towels? Do you need a garbage bag that's leak-proof? What do you need? So really think through that cleanup piece. Or what you'll find is that your program leader isn't going to want to do STEM because they're the only person cleaning up at the end of the day, which of course is no fun for anyone. And then you'll want to think about how you're going to organize the partner or small group work. Are you going to let kids pick their own partner? Are you going to let them pick their own small groups? Are you going to have kids number off 1 through 15 or 1 through 10, and then a second group 1 through 10, and then the ones combine the twos and so forth? How are you going to do that? And sometimes it's best to do it one way, and sometimes it's best to do another, but you need to have some options out there, especially if you've decided that it's not very effective for the kids in that group to be able to choose each other, because they tend to choose the people that they're going to fool around with instead of people they're going to get serious with. Sometimes you also want a person that has more knowledge in a particular area. You want those kids spread out so that they can be of support. So when you're preparing, it's important that you understand what you're going to do, that you've done the activity before, you're sure of what the materials and supplies are, you've set up a system for easy distribution, you've thought through your cleanup, and then you've thought through how you're going to organize the youth to work through this STEM opportunity. Then there's managing the environment. I know that people like to consider it classroom management, but I think that usually that means having kids behave. And I think that it's important that we understand that there are 3 pieces of that whole classroom management piece. And the first part is managing the environment. The space you're in needs to be your friend. And so sometimes people don't think that through, and there's lots of obstacles in the way. The second part is to have a behavior guidance plan. So with kids in 4th grade and up, it's great to start with a group plan and then work your way back to an individual plan, because they're very into social pressures. And with younger students, 3rd grade's kind of the transition year. But for Ks and 1s for sure, and probably your 2nd graders, starting out with an individual system of incentives will be more effective, and then move into the broader group. So that would be the behavior guidance piece. And then the third piece is really discipline. And discipline is how you hold people accountable. And discipline isn't punishment. Discipline is about consequences of the choices young people make to either follow the agreements or not to follow them. So when you manage the environment, I think that that's one of the areas we don't always think through as well as we could. And if the environment is our ally, the rest of it is so much easier. So when you are using your lesson and developing your lesson, what's the protocol for that lesson? Are you going to start with the whole group together, sitting together, and you're going to say, this is what we're going to do today, and then try and access their prior knowledge when they're all in the group? Or are you going to have them divide up into pairs earlier so the pairs are holding each other accountable? What you want to do is figure out how that is. If you have an environment where there are books and other things on tabletops and those need to be removed, how are you going to deal with that? How will you be sure that they get back to where they were once you leave? But you use the lesson protocol that would tell you different grouping strategies and how you'll engage them, and then how that environment can be used. One of the activities I like to do that engages all of the kids in accessing prior knowledge at the same time rather than one-on-one or one child at a time is what we call speed dating. And in speed dating, you have a circle uh, of half the kids, and they create a circle, and then they turn so that their backs are to each other. And so they're having a circle, but they're facing away from the center of the circle. Then you take the remaining youth and have them go and stand in front of each one of those students so that everybody has a partner. And then, so if you're going to do that and have the kids talk about what they know, say about inertia, and share that, and then in speed dating, you know how kids are rotated, or the people are rotated. You can rotate the outside circle, you can rotate the inside circle, so they're talking to different people. But to manage that environmentally, you have to have space. You can't have them do that without space. So you'll want to be sure that you're managing that space to be conducive. And if that space isn't conducive, then one of the things you need to do is stop the activity, rethink it, get kids back together, rethink what you're going to do, and then really set the parameters again for the boundaries. So that's one way you manage the environment. Another way that you do that is to set the young people up for success by letting them know what the order is going to be in the lesson and where they need to be at each piece of that. So if you are going to have discussion groups, what's that going to look like? Where will they need to be? If you're going to have some kids come up to model the lesson, where do the rest of them need to be so that they can see? If you're going to bring up multiple kids to demonstrate, what does that look like? How do they let you know that they're interested in volunteering? So where will that space be? And then how are you going to be sure that you can check for understanding and get to all of those kids if the environment doesn't allow for them to be spread apart far enough for you to move between? So it's really looking at that. And then, of course, there's MBWA, which is managed by walking around. And that's one of the best ways to manage the environment is to keep moving. Sometimes program leaders want to stay in one spot and have kids come to them. I'm not usually a fan of that, and the reason is that while Susie is walking up to talk to program leader George, Susie goes by a whole lot of people who can either interact in an inappropriate way with her or with whom she can interact inappropriately. So if the program leader is moving around, that works a little better. And the other thing is that there is nothing sacred by the front of a classroom. So you can have something to say in the middle of a classroom, at the back of the classroom, at the sides, and so that people understand that you are going to move around, and that way everyone can be seen. Lots of times kids rely on the fact that you didn't look at them, so probably you can't see them, even though in reality you absolutely can. Another way that you want to manage the environment beyond managing by walking around is to constantly scan. What can you see visually? What's happening out there? Remember that if something grabs your attention, you're probably going to see the second actor. What you saw first was the kid who did the first thing, and that's what drew your attention to it. And so if somebody is going to do something foolish, make a bad choice, probably they're doing it in retaliation or in response to something else that was done. So just be aware of that when you're scanning visually. And then also there's auditory scanning. Things that are too quiet aren't good. Things that are too noisy aren't good. The noise needs to be productive noise, not off the track noise. So it's really listening for those things. And of course, for your leader, if they realize that every time they approach a group they get silent, probably something's going on there that's not so helpful. So those scans, setting up your environment based on your lesson protocol, really having youth understand where they need to be at each part of the lesson, walking around and scanning both visually and auditorily will really help. And then, of course, taking advantage of the teachable moment means to ask kids to do a timeout while another child shares some amazing thing that they discovered. And when kids realize that you're really paying attention, they tend to want to do more for you to pay attention to rather than to do less. So managing the environment is key to really having a positive STEM experience for kids. And then, of course, finally, there's debriefing the STEM itself. I've seen a lot of programs, and again, they recap the activities. So they say things like you can see, what did we do? And then they can reflect on the activity that said what went well, what didn't, how could we strengthen the experience next time. But that's really debriefing the activity. You could use those questions debriefing a game that kids played outside or at the end of homework. What did we do? We did our homework. What went well? Well, it went really well when Johnny got up and helped me with my homework. Well, what didn't go so well? Well, what didn't go so well is that Clyde took my pencil and my other materials. What could we do to make that better next time? Well, we could see to it that there were enough textbooks for us to use and to go around. So that recap of the activity could go for anything that they did. So it's also important. You can absolutely and should debrief the activity and that part, but your youth leaders need to know that they need to debrief the STEM. So ask them, what STEM did you learn today? What did you learn about motion, if that's what you're working on? What did you learn about inertia? What did you learn about friction? Right? It's really focusing in on your STEM learning objective, your STEM goals. And then, of course, a good question to ask kids is, what else would you like to learn? Sometimes they just get their appetite whetted with this one activity, and they think, oh, I just wish we'd do this again and again because I would like to learn more. So in debriefing the STEM, you want to really talk about the specific STEM concept and what they learned about that and what else they would like to learn. It's also important to take that debrief about the STEM learning and ask them, how will you apply that to another aspect of your life? They might say, I'll apply it in my science class. I'll apply that information in my math class. But they might also say, I'm going to apply that when I ride my skateboard down the sidewalk so that I don't end up having a collision with the cement again. So it's really talking with them about the STEM learning. When we debrief that way, we drive home the point to young people that the learning is what really matters. I know we've all had the experience of asking a young person, what did you do today? And they respond magically with the word nothing. And we all know that's not true. We all know that they did something and they learned something, but they don't always recognize it in that way. So by debriefing, we help them think back on what they did and then extrapolate the learning piece from that, and then think once again about how they will apply that learning moving forward. I think that if you do that with your staff and your staff does that with kids, we will have a much richer STEM experience going on. So that's really the key parts that I think would be helpful in managing, in really setting up your space and your activities for success. So to just really quickly recap, it's setting your STEM learning goals, setting your clear expectations about how young people will behave in that situation, preparing yourself with the knowledge that you need, but also the supplies and materials that kids will need, and not putting yourself in a position of having to be embarrassed because you didn't know how something was going to work. And then managing the space that you're in to be sure that it is really going to be conducive to the type of learning you would like for kids to do. And then finally, debriefing the activity for sure, but also more importantly, debriefing the STEM content and matching your debriefing with your STEM goals as well. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those. And I'll give you just a minute or so to either raise your hand and I'll mic you, or you can type them into the question bar and I'll read them and answer them. And if not, we're going to say thank you for attending the webinar, and know that you can access this through the OC STEM website and could play it at any time for any group of people. So just a few more seconds on hand raising or anything of that note. Not seeing that, we will be sending you a set of a couple questions that ask you what worked for you in this webinar and what would you like more of, and so that we can continue to strengthen these. And so I would like to thank you all for attending and appreciate the fact that you are willing to work with us to really move forward and create strong STEM programs. So thank you for sharing almost an hour of your morning, and we look forward to working with you in the future.